Something that will never be able to automate is human interaction. I still think being in a room or hopping on a call with someone, an AI can never be a true user. So I don't think we can ever automate humans in the loop for like technical and style guide, and you can never automate the context layer. You are constantly going to have to go in and adapt those rules based off conversations, based off feedback. I honestly think AI has made the possibilities endless for career growth for us and helps us show our strategy way more, and shows our way of thinking way better.
Yeah, and if everything goes well, we should be live. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Everything Outside Code, where I bring on a fantastic GTM leader, a documentation creator, writer, a marketing expert. And today I have Gareth. Everyone on my team says I need to talk to Gareth, as we're going to be talking today about documentation and seeing documentation as sort of product infrastructure. If you've been following the whole like AI and automation wave lately, especially from a product standpoint, you would have seen within spheres, folks depict documentation as sort of the ground truth and the source for both humans and AI agents eventually. So we're sort of trying to think about what do documentation systems or maybe knowledge systems of the future could look like, as our friends at Mintlify would call it. So I'm excited to have Gareth on this episode. We're going to go over when to automate documentation. Should we even be automating documentation? Who should you be as a technical writer tomorrow? Or if you're just part of a product team that cares about the knowledge infrastructure for your product, what does that look like? Thank you so much for coming on today, Gareth.
I know. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, great. So, Gareth, before we jump right into it, just in a very few sentences, why you? How'd you get on this podcast?
How did I get here? So just a brief overview, I suppose. I am a documentation manager here at Gravity, which is an agent management platform, focusing on controlling and governing agents in the modern landscape that we see. How I got here briefly, so I have a master's in technical communication and managed to basically find my way straight into the technical writing world through fintech. Doing UX writing, hardware writing. I've been in open source. I've been in enterprise, big and short. And what I've been kind of figuring out lately now is how to automate documentation and how to integrate documentation in the most practical way for technical writers in the modern age, and use it to optimize our field rather than replace us. Because my big kind of mantra when it comes to AI and documentation is it's a tool for optimization, not replacement. And it truly, if done right, keeps technical writers' judgment where it's needed most and kind of helps us prove our worth even more so than in the old traditional senses. So, I've been using tools like Gitbook, GitHub, and N8N, and a whole other host of tooling to kind of automate and optimize myself and my team here.
Yeah, that's great. Would you say your team is sort of small or large when you look at like the documentation team and or say the product team in general?
No, I think our product and engineering kind of stands strong. I think the docs team is lean, but it's definitely shown its worth. And I think in the age of AI, that's where optimization has really come in really great. It shows that you can do quite a lot, even with maybe smaller teams. So you can do things like scaling intelligently rather than just hiring people for the sake of it. And I think that's really good. Learning to optimize existing teams, I think, is where we need to be at the moment.
Yeah, that's amazing. I know a lot of teams, especially the documentation team within the product, they end up having like 1 to 2 technical writers max working with the product manager. So I'm curious, with a small team like yours, how do you manage to keep pace with the engineering team? I can imagine that with AI now, they're moving at like lightning speed. what you decide to automate first. You talked about automation a bit, and what you refuse to hand over. What's the bit that you feel like your team absolutely have to keep?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think there's a couple of points there. So how we work with product and engineering is we are have close relationships embedded straight into the org, which is really good, reporting into engineering leadership. And what we've done is built up quite a lot of relationships to kind of work with engineers. So we spend some time kind of building up those relationships and what works for both of us. And by what I mean by what works for both of us, I mean things like adopting a docs as code approach. I think it's important. The way that we've done it is to build up relationships and find a process that works for both technical writers and engineers. So for example, like adopting docs as code approach. And when you do that, you use engineering practices, which means that engineers are familiar with the process. So you're not asking them to suddenly work in two different workflows. It's the same workflow, just the output is slightly different. Instead of code, you have docs. And I think that's really worked well for us. And we've embedded documentation as the definition of done in feature work, which means that a feature cannot be shipped without documentation attached to it, which is really, really great. The very first thing I remember that we automated was release notes. Because release notes was taking hours of collaborative time, kind of like on calls, going back and forth on like Slack or email to discuss that. And so the first thing that we did was we learned how to automate release notes, that they were just generated automatically, firstly off documentation that we had written, but then we took it one step further and now we've learned how to document feature work directly from the code, or at least draft the initial draft from code. And the release notes are generated as part of that kind of automation. But that's where we started because release notes were just taking too much of our time for the amount of effort putting into it was just disproportionate. So that's kind of where we started. So what I would say to people, like if you're looking, is finding kind of those repetitive tasks that seem like that you're putting in a disproportionate amount of time for whatever the outcome is. And what I will always say is like automating kind of the repetitive tasks. So you're talking like feature work is a very consistent process in any org, I would imagine. So automating how you generate feature work is really good place to start because it's consistent. You're probably going to follow the same flow for every release cycle. So it's easy to identify what can be automated. And what I will always say then as well is to not try to automate the entire system in one go. My methodology for it is to kind of clearly map out the structures and the systems in place and then look at it, because we use N8N, is to really just think about, I now think about it in like nodes, because that's what N8N uses, and identify like what nodes can be automated. So looking at each aspect of the process in chunks and then learning, okay, that can be automated easily, even without AI, even if you're thinking like using Python scripts or some other tooling like GitHub Actions. I think it's a really good place to start because even without AI, you can still start identifying some form of automation that goes into it. And what I would always say is where I always keep humans in the loop is a couple of places, but primarily at the very beginning of a process and primarily at the very end as well. So you're thinking about like, where will this fit into my information architecture? How does this fit into our content strategy? Things like that at the very beginning. And if somebody said like, oh, I've generated a doc. Okay, do other docs need to be updated? Did our automation miss that? Did the AI miscategorize something? So keeping humans in the loop at the very beginning and then also at the very end. Even through AI generation, something that I am very passionate about is keeping humans in the loop. So even when an AI agent generates docs, there always has to be an SME review. So a subject matter expert has to sign off on the technicalities of it. And then a technical writer has to go in and look at it to ensure that it is like what holds up to our style guide. and follows just general best practices. And that can also be sped up, like by like creating things like skills or calling automations that like fail automations on GitHub, or just creating a skill that you can use alongside like Claude um, to kind of automatically go through the doc for you. And then you just have to give it one pass. Like there's things like that that can be very easily automated. And I think where people kind of get really held back by the idea of AI integration and AI automation is they think that they need to have a really complex setup and a really detailed agent that really goes in and does all the work. And I think that's where people fall down. I think you need to start with the simple things and then work up, especially if you're like, for example, if you're in a company where you're the only technical writer, let's say, and you have no one to peer review for you. By creating like a peer review kind of like skill or an editor skill that you can just drop into Claude, Cursor, Codex, whatever you're using, that is your peer review all of a sudden. So then you don't need to pass it off to another technical writer because you've automated that. So there's small things like that that can really boost automation. And that's where I think people should start. But then also like if you are using AI with a skill to automate against your style guide, if you have one, still reading it yourself, keeping yourself as a human in the loop and fully understanding like, does it make sense in the user journey? Does it make sense where you've placed it, or do we need another doc, or thinking, hey, now I know for a fact that like this changes something else in another doc. Let me go fix that next. That is probably the most crucial part. And that's where we need our judgment the most at the moment, I would believe.
Yeah, that's cool. So I'm curious, right? It's a rule of thumb that you should do things that don't scale, especially when you're a startup or when you're building a team from scratch, right? Some folks can decide to, get onto a team and already start looking for documentation tasks to automate. But more often than not, you start by just writing everything first, doing it manually. And then you start to notice maybe bottlenecks or cracks operationally. At what point did you decide that, okay, we're at a tipping point now, we should start thinking about automating stuff, right? Because there had to be that point. So what were some of the signs, like clear signs, or would you say gaps that immediately signal to you like, hey, we need to just start doing better with AI workflows?
I think for me, it was the adoption of AI and automations across the wider org, especially in product and engineering. So you saw that like they were creating more PRDs quicker, and engineering were delivering features quicker. And therefore like timelines were reduced. So instead of something taking 3 months, it might take 1 month. And so when I saw that happening and I saw the way that engineering was starting to scale and cycle time was starting to get reduced, what I really felt that was a clear signal that we need to follow suit. Otherwise, we were going to fall behind and we would start drowning in a backlog of tickets. So that was the clear signal to me. It's like, if you see your product and engineering teams starting to increase productivity because of their AI integrations, or just in general, maybe they're scaling and adding more people, more engineers and more product managers, I think that's a clear signal that you need to do the same. You need to start thinking about how can I optimize these processes to keep up with the new workload.
Yeah, that's cool. Just being reactive to changes in potential capacity. So you know that from what you're seeing upstream, it's about to be crazy downstream from where you're at, seeing changes in, engineering behavior and engineering velocity, in general. That's cool. Thanks. Something I've always thought about has been how we manage documentation today, where data comes from multiple sources. AI also doesn't help because now we get, like product brainstorm notes from AI tools. You probably have PRDs living on Linear or Jira or something similar. As a product manager, you also have like as a documentation manager, you have your document chores or sources of truth that you keep, right? For a product, you also have conversations that probably were held with the marketing team or customer success team. How do you bring all these together into a single source of truth that eventually becomes a documentation today? Because there's the part about writing that AI can help with, but there's the part about collecting all this knowledge into this funnel? Is this something that you also automate as well? And in what order did you sort of like do this? What's also like a source of truth if everything else fails?
I think when looking at an org, I think the first thing that you should always do is identify what is your single source of truth. So if you're using like Confluence, Linear, Jira, or something else as your kind of product management, project management tool, whatever that might look like, I would start by identifying where should everything be tracked. I think that's probably the best question to ask yourself is like, as an org, where should we be tracking everything? And start there. And tell people that if it does not exist in the tool that your org has designated as your kind of project management tool, then it doesn't get documented. I think you need to be, obviously there's exceptions to the rule, but I think a general good rule of thumb is like, so for example, if you use Jira, telling people, well, if it's not in my Jira backlog or a Jira workflow, then I don't know that it exists and it can't be documented. So I think by identifying even what your source of truth is and telling people that they need to like use a workflow to submit a ticket. And if you don't submit a ticket, then we can't document it. I think that's a really good way to start and establishing those kind of best working practices. And even with conversations like Slack conversations, email conversations, if these things are happening internally, I always tell people, please submit a ticket. Like, because the time that it would take me to ramp up on a conversation about what has been going on, a person could just submit a ticket with the necessary details, and then I can just act on it from there. And I think specificity is key as well when managing kind of how those requests come in for documentation. Obviously, feature work is very easy because like the feature has been built, it's been detailed. Things like internal requests coming from different areas of the business, I think it's important to remind people as well that like you have to be specific and setting up those kind of boundaries that if it's something general, like, I don't know, your overview guide seems vague. Like, what does that mean? And then pushing it back to say, hey, what did you mean by this? Like, vague in what way? What can we do to help you? And sometimes what you'll find is they'll be like, oh, I don't really know what I need. And it's saying, I'm like, well, I can't act on it because you don't know what they want. So by getting people to also specify what they need from you very specifically, that creates actionable goals and you don't have a backlog then of like very vague requests. Like all these things, like setting up also, like you were talking about PRTs, or maybe like there's other kind of pre-built material that might be beneficial. But what we did, which I thought was very, very good, and it works for us really well, is coming to an understanding with your product management teams and your engineering teams to understand when is features particularly locked in, and this is what the vision will be. Or like we have built it and we know that it's not going to change beyond this point. And having set kind of entry points for technical writing, for your technical writers and documentation teams, I mean, having that kind of designated entry point into existing workflows is probably the best way that you need to be. So like, if that's like, hey, we've come up with an idea, we think this is what it'll look like, and then going, okay, then thank you for letting me know that you've gotten to a certain point. Let me tell you what this might look like in the docs. And then when the feature is built, for example, or coming close to being built, going, okay, let us jump in here and draft, or set up an automation that drafts the docs for us at this point. So identifying those entry points, I think, have been crucial to us. So then you're not sitting on calls that are kind of like not beneficial to you, or jumping in and having to going through an iterative process. I don't believe in kind of like doing things iteratively. I'd rather just do it once and have it work. And so identifying those entry points is quite crucial to that. I think, and you can set up automations for that as well and have AI like scan tickets to understand like what's good and what's not. But that's where I would start kind of with that whole funneling of information. And in the world that we're in today, I think the more signals that we have, the better. I honestly think a big backlog is not a bad thing in documentation, because it means that people care, and it means that people are submitting tickets, or a system is submitting tickets. That if you have something set up that submit tickets automatically based off of X, Y, and Z, I think that's a really good thing, because it just means that there's areas for improvement and you can action those really easily. So yeah, that's how I have started like funneling information in a way that's actionable and in a way that's kind of like meaningful.
Yeah, thanks for that. What I got as a summary from all that is that you just need to have first a system that's working. Like, you need to have a process that is functional first before you can move past that. Because if underlying systems are broken, if your feedback lines, the way you define products, the way you document the products for development, the documents you hand over to engineers, how you spec out products, if that is broken inherently, then you're definitely going to have a problem, down the line with documentation. So that's what I'm hearing, is fix that part, and then you can start thinking about introducing AI to help make these things better.
Absolutely. Yeah. And my big kind of motto when it comes to anything documentation or process wise is don't like fix it, build it. So like if like you've identified that, I don't know, it's taking too long to do screenshots, like manually, build a system like using Playwright that takes them automatically using your local environment with AI. And it's things like that. You're completely right. Without process, the rest falls apart. So what I always say to people is map out processes manually, because you're completely right. Once you have a manual process set up, then you can identify when AI and automation can kick in. I think that's absolutely true.
Yeah. So at what point here of this workflow, from maybe Jira tickets to having conversations or interviews with folks in customer success to log that data, where does AI come into the play? Where exactly does it come in? Does it sit on top of maybe your issue tracker, or does it sit on top of like GitHub with your code base? Where do you introduce AI into this workflow?
Yeah. So for me, the biggest way that we've introduced it is through like verifications, like obviously in a very secured way, is like having like an agent read the code base and understanding, like help me understand features. So like when it comes to tickets, we kind of like that is still manual because we need to understand what people need. But when it comes to understanding then, so like for example, something that I've been able to do is use AI if there's a very complex feature that the SME has handed over. I use AI as kind of like a buddy, like a teammate, to go in and say, hey, look at this kind of code base or look at these code diffs and tell me what has changed and and maybe you may never have seen the feature before. So it's then like, help me understand, what does this feature actually do? How does it work with our current systems? What will change for the customer? And then you can go in, and if you're still confused or there's still points that lack clarity, what I find then is you can go into an SME interview or send them messages that are way more specific and targeted. So that's where we start adding on to it then. So instead of saying, hey, can you explain this feature to me, which takes up a lot of time, you can ask a question like, hey, I know feature X does 1, 2, and 3, but what phase does it happen in? Is it phase 1, phase 2? And then you can start pinpointing way better questions. So for us, it's very good at like the research side, kind of building on like knowledge and knowledge integration, even like, even on our own documentation site, which you can go and visit now and use, is like we use Kappa AI to do it. And what that also does then is, and we also use it ourselves to like jump in and say like, because that attaches to many knowledge sources. And then that helps us really understand products better. So it builds up that understanding, and that's where we kind of put AI firstly. And then like what we then do then is, once we understand it, obviously get AI to help us with the pros. But I think this is where a lot of people fall down. They think they can just like, when you're building on these systems, what I think is probably the most crucial part is building the context. So like having the correct framework around it, I think. So if you're building it on top of, I don't know, a code base or your documentation set, and you're thinking, okay, I really want it to just draft the documentation. That's good. But like, if that's all that you tell it, you're going to run into issues. So I think as well as layering on top of existing systems, you have to think what's behind those systems. So like, if you have a style guide, do you have the necessary skills set up to read the style guide and then apply the style guide accurately, and in some sort of deterministic way? And then if you do, where does that come into the loop? For example, like if you editing a doc comes at the very end, like, did you change the meaning of something by mistake if you use AI? So it's like adding in that kind of feedback loop with the SME as well. Like, because when you introduce AI, it introduces complexities, and you need to like really go in and make sure that like your workflows maintain that scalable element. But I think the best way for you to scale processes and layer on top of it is to build the context. So make sure your skills are good, make sure your pipelines are good, making sure all the context that it needs is up to date, and you're scaling it. So like if there's a rule missing from your style guide, make sure the style guide is up to date, and then any skill or pipeline that is attached to is updated alongside it. So I think for me, what I like spend some time doing now is like making sure that contextual layer is good. And then we can start building on top of existing workflows then with our existing context.
That's amazing. I love the thought of the contextual layer. So, but I'm curious, what exactly is non-negotiable context here?
Yeah. In terms of documentation, I think non-negotiables for me are always like, it has to adhere to the style guide. Like we all have different ways of interacting, but I think having one consistent voice, and we were talking like what we can probably get onto later is like what has remained true throughout documentation's evolution in the age of AI is something that my very first technical writing manager said to me was, because we had a team of about 5 or 6, he said, when I look or review a document, I don't want to be able to tell who wrote it. I want to look at it and know that we all have the exact same voice. And that's something that I had to learn. Like I will never forget, he reviewed a document of mine and we went through it together. And I can't even remember what the sentence was, but I remember him just saying to me, he was like, I could hear your accent come through in this sentence. So we need to change that. So, and I think that remains true. So like for me, your style guide, non-negotiable, and the way that you like edit the skills, or if somebody else says, oh, I built my own docs editor. No, you are the person, the specialist, the SME for documentation. Tell them, no, I'll use this one, because then you have one consistent voice. Templates are another one. If you're building documentation from scratch, or maybe like you just have a brain dump from an SME, having templates, like if you're following methods like the diataxis method, make sure you have something that tells them how to write a tutorial, how to write a how-to guide, how to write a concept article. And then so that there's that consistency, so that basically whenever a user falls on any page of your documentation site, they know exactly where to look. They know that it's the exact same kind of layout as the one that came before it if they're looking at the same concept. So there are 2 non-negotiables.
Okay.
A context layer as well, I think is important, is obviously the code base, making sure everything is verified against the code base. And that makes SME's life easier, that if you can say, hey, we've like verified this against the code base and we've used our local environments to verify against the UI, but can you just give it a double check to make sure everything's okay? And then they can just fly through it then.
Yeah. That's cool. So now I'm curious, what does the infrastructure setup look like? You talked about having Anything or using Anything for this and having like different nodes. How do you connect to like your code base? How do you connect to your issue tracker and like any other communication systems? What does the feedback loop look like with like a human in the loop? If I was going to set this up today for myself to have like a documentation agent that helps us with driving documentations connected to like a documentation system, how would I go about setting it up? Maybe you can just share from like a high level what systems are involved.
Yeah. So I think you need to have like a webhook set up to your like tracker, whatever that is. So, for example, if it's Jira, making sure that you have everything centralized, either in a board, a filter, a project, whatever that looks like, and have something set up that can pull that information through, like, for example, webhooks. What then I would do then is, well, is the infrastructure then, obviously we use N8N because it's low code. You can learn to use it very easily. I think there's still a talk up online how we did it with kind of release notes from like a year ago. What I would also think about when you're setting up infrastructure as well, what I think is really crucial, something that I kind of haven't spoken about, is API calls and AI calls can be very expensive. So I think what always that you need to do is when setting up infrastructure is think about obviously guardrails for sensitive information. If you're tapping into something like a project management tool, does it filter out sensitive data? I think that's always important. And then think about the cost. I think what's also important about AI integration when you're setting up the infrastructure is what can I use instead of AI, or what can I use instead of an API call? Because like we use Python scripts for quite a lot of things because it makes the whole thing cheaper. So I would also make sure that you have a Docs as code approach and set up a GitHub repository for everything to go through PRs, because what I find is having things go through PRs is easier for humans in the loop. And I would set things up to go directly to PRs all the time instead of things like Google Docs or anything like that. It's just, it gets too messy. So having things like that. What I would also do is have some sort of kind of like easy access environment, if that's true, like a cluster or a virtual machine that everyone can use, like on your team specifically. Like a local environment that never has any sensitive information. It's not used by like the devs. It's just something that you use to clarify the docs, and integrate that using Playwright to verify against the code. Incredible, because then it can map, like if you are using AI and Playwright to go through the UI, you don't want any sensitive information going out. And it's just something that you can do. And then always making sure it's like the production not production for you, but as in it is something that the customer will see. So if, like, don't let it be like a QA environment or a pre-prod environment. Make sure it's just like, this is what the customer will see, and testing against that. What else would I set up as well? For humans in the loop, the feedback loop, what we've started doing is like tagging SMEs in the project tracker to say, hey, can you review this PR for me? Or if they prefer like Slack channels, setting up a system that sends messages to whatever Slack channel has been decided as the place to review documentation PRs. I think that's also crucial. So this is like when you're setting up the infrastructure, like we were talking about relationship building, meet your devs halfway, wherever they want to be. If they want to be if they don't mind Jira, use Jira. If they say, hey, look, we prefer a dedicated Slack channel for PRs, meet them there. Because like documentation, like for the most part, people don't like writing documentation, but it's okay with that. It keeps me employed because I love it. So I'd set up that infrastructure and determining where is the best place to insert those feedback loops instead of just saying, hey, you all need to be in Jira now. Maybe they don't check Jira every day because they're devs and they live in GitHub. Or maybe they might just say, just tag me in the PR. And then you can just set it up really easily to say, tag in the PR. What I would also say is, like set up like veil automations as well, like that we can use to run against our style guide, as just an extra layer of governance, just to say, hey, like I know AI looked to this, but can you catch anything else? So setting up those kind of infrastructures, is kind of crucial, I think. Yeah. So those would be the kind of the places that I would start, and then, that's kind of how we would do it.
That's cool. And then what AI models or tools would you say, AI models especially, or a harness like Claude Code, Codex, would you use to drive these, or do you use the model APIs in N8N and then use maybe like a chat interface in N8N to say create documentation pull requests?
Yeah, so we use kind of like API calls quite a lot, but for the most part, the driver for myself and my team is Claude Code, which is really good. Like using like Opus is amazing for completing tasks and for helping us understand. Like I said, be careful with the API calls, just in case there's some like costs behind it. So make sure that you're kind of doing stuff locally as much as you can. Or I would also work with like your AI engineers or to set up like gateways with like for API calls that if you know we're only allowed X amount of API calls a day, make sure you set up that rate limit before you start before you start getting charged, and you never know what might be charged past whatever your limit is. If anything, or you might just get shut down and then you think, oh God, I have to wait now till tomorrow. So so having something like your Gravity Gateway that will like also handle API management to like set it up. And that's what we did to make sure that all our calls are rate limited. So yeah, we use a mixture of like chat interfaces and API calls. It depends on the situation and what would be the best to do that.
Yeah, now that's great. I like something you said, which is you try as much as possible to save cost by looking at Python scripts, right? What's something you can do with Playwright? I think that's something a lot of folks have forgotten, especially even some developers. I saw a joke somewhere. Someone was like, hey, you can just implement search on the website. And the developer was like, so which model? Like, I guess I have to find a model that's really fast at pulling up data and returning it to the UI. And it's like, no, you can just just implement search. You don't need an AI model for everything. So that's what I'm hearing here is that a lot of things, especially since you're looking at cost, with content, you're having to deal with a lot of tokens, right? You're having to deal with tons of tokens on every run, especially if you want to make sure the document stays contextual. So yeah, look for these trade-offs with Python scripts and Playwright
absolutely.
scripts.
Like I'll give you an example. In one of our workflows, like we add labels to decide if docs are needed or not. And we use Python scripts before it even reaches an AI to determine, okay, it says no docs, so we just forget about that PR or we forget about that Jira ticket, and it just filters it out. So instead of an AI or an API call going all the time and costing you tokens, it just automatically just filters it out. So then you're reducing the cost before you even get there. So yeah, I think that's crucial. Yeah, I think sometimes, with this kind of like new AI models, we forget about the basics, and I think we need to return to those a little bit more.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. Going into the content experience, there's something I've realized over time, and more so, it's become more important lately, which is that documentation is both like an enablement tool as well as a growth tool, right? So a lot of technical buyers use the documentation to evaluate a product, including developers. Like you go when you look at the docs look shitty. You're like, nah, this is going to stress my life. I need to just bounce. So from your opinion, at what point have you felt like there's this divide where we're talking about enablement, but then the docs also have to persuade a user? How do you handle both? How do you strike a balance between both? When does that transition happen also?
Yeah, I think so. And the way that I look at it is, and I forget where I heard this kind of persona approach, but I look at it as you have two key personas. Like you said, you have the evaluator, which could be like a product manager, or it could be like a CTO, architect, whoever, that goes onto your doc site and goes, will this suit my business case? And then you have the implementer, which could be like a tech lead or just a dev, depending on the situation, where they hand it off and say, how easy is this to implement? And I think that really drives down to like the content that's on it. So like, I think an evaluator is really going to look at like the conceptual aspects of your docs. So even like overview sections or explaining features or diagrams, I think that's crucial to them. And it's about then like the trade-off is like having more, like what I think we often forget in like how-to guides and tutorials is like how crucial the overview section is to that, to understanding like, does this suit my use case? What will the outcome be? Am I even the right person that should be looking at this? So if you're looking at something like feature X, let's call it, and going, okay, the overview just says this is an overview about feature X, but it doesn't tell me what will it do. I think it's the key to both is getting people the answer that they need straight away. So in the age of AI, I think we have to go back to the basic principles like chunking information and having everything live as its own kind of entity. So like what I try to do is like every section of my docs page is a self-contained idea. So the overview, if you took that away about feature X, you would still know what feature X is without having to read the procedural steps. And I think that's what an evaluator kind of needs. They need that high level understanding and knowing that the outcome that they're about to go through, like that procedure has the outcome that they want. And then when they hand like, maybe it's just that page over to a implementer, then they will go through all the steps and go, yep, or the prerequisites going, yep, we have that, we have this. And the steps seem really easy. Let me give it a try. Look, they have an open source model. Let me download that. And it says I can use it with open source. So I'll let you know if I can do it quickly. So I think having fully self-contained pages is the way to do it.
Yeah. I like the thing you say about like someone like a technical evaluator coming on, looking at the documentation and knowing that the objectives will be met. At Hackmamba, we say for certain pages in the documentation, especially the conceptual pieces that are aimed at someone exploring a solution, but they're not currently in implementation, right? Those parts, they have to be very like transformation led. So when a user comes to your documentation, they are likely at like either the mid or bottom of funnel stage of like a product decision-making process. When you're in that stage, if they make it to your documentation, it means that they're really considering your product, right?
Yeah.
You have a shared sense of what problems they have. You could do one of two things. You could decide to talk about your solution exclusively, which is what a lot of people do in their documentation is, here are the features we have. Here's what it does. Here are the concepts. Here's a glossary of how we think about these terms. But then I've seen that the folks that actually win, they flip it. They put it within the context of the reader. They're like, here's the transformation you're going to get from this feature.
Yeah.
Because the feature does this, right? Rather than saying like, here's what the feature is, here's what it does. You can use it for this piece. It's more after this feature, here's the state you're going to be in. Here's what transformation looks like for you. So you're coming in for a secure database. If you use this feature, if you use like our data branching feature, you're able to ship products without having to maintain multiple environments or spinning up multiple databases for your product. So that's sort of like how I've seen folks that we work with, and also how we approach documentation as well is, like you said, ensuring that the person that comes on, the objectives are met. And we see this as like it's framed within the transformation that they're going to receive from this. And the transformation they'll receive from this is pretty subjective, right? So far, we've taken pride in being able to understand what that transformation is because we are developers. Also, we understand the product. We understand like why we've built this, and we have product history as well. We understand the market. It's the humanness we bring into it, right? But on the other hand, we're using AI to create this documentation. At least that's where the industry is tending towards. What human value becomes important? Where does a person feel like I need to be in front of like the documentation? I need to contribute meaningfully to the documentation. What's valuable to a person now beyond just writing the documentation? Because I feel like writing docs, that's partly gone to a large extent. What then becomes valuable? How does the technical writer of tomorrow see themselves as valuable?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it's been something that I've been thinking about. I think what we'll see is an evolution into more specialized roles. So you're thinking content strategist. And I think what we'll see is, and what I think people should be doing, is looking about how to expand their responsibilities. So it's like, not only are you looking at like the words on a page, like you said, that's primarily gone now because of AI, but looking at, is this page actually in the right place? Or do I need to think about something else? Or, hey, this says now that it does X, Y, and Z. Shouldn't that be updated in a table somewhere? So like having that more holistic approach. And then what I think is really important is thinking as like docs as product. It's like, what do our users want from the doc site as a whole? Do they want something broken out into its whole new section, and we've never done that before? Or maybe something is in its own section that people are confused about. Why does that exist over there when a lot of the features are talked about over here? And it's, do they want better search qualities? So it's like adopting a product mindset for documentation, I think, is crucial. And thinking about the holistic experience. And like what I've noticed is like my role is expanding now into like how to market the doc site. What do I need to do to help with SEO and AEO? Thinking about in-product documentation. Maybe like certain teams don't do that. Maybe that's something that we need to look at. It's like, how do we help people in product with like tool tips? And I know that's primarily done by like UX writers, but if your company doesn't have a UX writer, that's something that you can adopt and go in and then adopt those new skills. So it's more about what I think is about expending skills and responsibilities. And then also thinking about what like I've seen people do online is like submitting more bug requests. And like in the world of coding, like maybe you could like vibe code a draft solution and send it to a dev to be like, hey, I saw this bug. This is what I think it means. This is what I think the solution might be, if you're that way inclined from an engineering perspective. And you can submit a PR maybe and have them look at it and say, will this work or not? So you can start interacting with more and more departments really, really well. And even from an operational perspective, if you've integrated AI in a way that has sped up efficiency, I know, in your tracking tool. So then like find a way then to say, hey, I've generalized it for the whole company. And next thing, you're helping out operations. So I honestly think AI has made the possibilities endless for career growth for us and helps us show our strategy way more, and shows our way of thinking way better as well.
Yeah, that's great. I'd say internally that it is a force multiplier in all ramifications. You just need to see it, and you need to figure out what force is it multiplying. Which brings me to my last question here, and that is, when does all this stop being true? And by all this, I mean, when does automation stop being the answer? At what point, or have you felt like just automating this is causing some hidden problems that you need to stop, or at least you need to close that workflow? Is that something that you've experienced before?
I think something that we'll never be able to automate is human interaction. Like, you can say submit a Jira ticket as much as you want, but going back and forth to say, like in a loop to say, provide more information, they give you more, it's still not what you need or what you want. I still think being in a room or hopping on a call with someone is the quickest way. I think you can only automate what's automatable, if that makes sense. And you can't automate things like you can to a certain extent things like information architecture, but you still need that human element. Like an AI can never be a true user in the sense that like they'll just like, oh, this step didn't work. They won't understand like, can I do a workaround? Or if I did, does I need to go into the docs and things like that? There's so many human elements that are still needed. And I think it's like relationship building. Like you can't automate a relationship with a dev. You need to build that up. And I think having humans in the loop, you can automate that. Like I always say, like, if a dev ever looks at a doc and they're like, oh, I put it through Claude and it said that there's this, and this. And I kind of push back and say, no, I don't want AI to look at it. Can you look at it as well? Or just forget the AI, whatever. But I was like, I need you to like look at it with your own eyes, because we need to make sure, because if we don't have that kind of human in the loop, then what's like, we might as well just publish it, and God only knows what the AI might say, even with all the guardrails in the world. So I don't think we can ever automate humans in the loop for like technical and style guide, and you can never automate the context layer. The context layer, that's the foundation of everything, that is never going to be automated. You are
Yeah.
constantly going to have to go in and adapt those rules based off conversations, based off feedback. And I think having that interaction with the AI is crucial. So that will never be automated. Obviously, you can automate like drafting of skills, but what goes into those skills still remains with the specialists, and it always should.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you, especially the context, right? Because
Mm.
there's a myriad of like complex human variables, right, that are rooted in also emotional choices and opinions and decisions that we'll eventually make. And this effectively transcends whatever logical reason we've programmed into AI systems. So
Yeah.
I do know that, yes, 100% of the technical writers of tomorrow, this is my strong opinion, is that the technical writers of today that stay doing the same thing, they are cooked. That's it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Technical writers of tomorrow, they'll need to evolve to focus more on like human interaction and seeing ways they can uncover things that AI ordinarily wouldn't, and maybe not even patterns it wouldn't recognize, but uncommon patterns, because I've seen AI models are great at, pattern recognition from past activities, but net new patterns that could come up, that's where technical writers of tomorrow should lean towards, or just creators and anyone that's a knowledge worker of tomorrow should lean towards. Well,
100%. It's AI is a tool, not a replacement, and you need to learn how to use it. Not unfortunately, sorry. It's like you just need to use it like any other tool. I'm sure when Excel was brought in, or like Google Translate, I'm sure those people also started freaking out, and they're still around today.
Yeah, I thought I always think like when the first man discovered fire, what happened that day? It's like, oh my God, crazy.
Exactly.
Or when we found electricity, it was like, you find something like electricity, you're either like praised or you're burned on a stake for being a witch or a wizard. It's one or the other.
Yeah.
But it's usually like a hugely transformative event. Well, thank you so much, Gareth, for coming on. This has been really great. I see we're just a bit over time, but thank you so much.
No, thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed this conversation. So thank you so much.
Yeah, that's great. And what's the best way for anyone to find you? Is it on LinkedIn? Is it on X?
Just LinkedIn. That's probably the only place that I'm active these days. So Gareth Brinn on LinkedIn. If you search me up, or if you search up Gravity, I'll appear. So yeah, please feel free, connect, send me a message. I'm always happy to talk about docs, AI, the world in general, whatever. Send me a message, let's connect. And yeah, always happy to have these conversations.
Yep, amazing. Well, that's today's episode of Everything Outside Code, and we'll see you on the next one. Cheers, everyone.